Morning, Las Vegas. It's Zandra Pollard with It's Where I Am. Today, my guests are dialect coach Samara Bay and otolaryngologist Dr. Michael Johns. Today, we'll be talking about the perception of how you speak. So, if you didn't know, if you look back at some of my previous shows, you'll notice that my voice changes. Sometimes it's a little breathy, like this. And sometimes it's a little softer, like this. And oftentimes, as of lately, it's strong and powerful, like this. So it's been a long road. My voice has gone through many changes. I had a goiter growing on my thyroid, which made me have to have it removed. So that happening caused my vocal cords to kind of collapse or paralyze. So I've been getting a little help from Dr. Johns with some treatments that have helped me to breathe better. But with breathing better comes speaking softer. So I'm glad to have him on to explain because I have met quite a few people since my situation that are dealing with the same thing. And I was so surprised because I thought I was alone. Thought I was the only one, just like mental health. You feel like you're the only one and then you realize you're not. That's the importance of this radio talk show, to bring awareness. And so, that being said, let's bring on Dr. Johns to talk about kind of my journey, how we met, treatment, because I am getting a little Botox, and unfortunately, it's not the cosmetic kind, it's the medical kind. So I am getting Botox in my vocal cords to strengthen those muscles so that I can breathe much better. And there you go. So, Dr. Johns, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Sandra, thank you so much for having me. It is a joy to see you and doing so well.
Yes, you are so awesome. I have to say, I am so pleased with your bedside banner, I think it's called, right? So whenever I come into your office, you're like, because I'm always nervous, right? You take this big needle and you want to stick it down my throat, right? So you're injecting this needle in my throat, and I'm always so super nervous and scared, but you always make me feel comfortable, relaxed, and we get it done.
Well, thank you.
So how long have you been practicing, and can you explain the difference between an ENT and what you do, an otolaryngologist?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So I've been, as the gray hairs show, I've been at this for a few years. I finished my 11 years of training in 2003. So about 20 years I've been practicing the T of ENT. So ear, nose, and throat, and otolaryngology is a specialty of medicine that we all commonly know as ENT, ear, nose, and throat. And it's a medical and a surgical specialty. But we specialize. It's a very complex area. Some people specialize in hearing in the ear. Some people specialize in the nose and the sinus. And I specialize in the T of ENT, the throat. It's called laryngology, voice disorders.
Okay.
And so that's the only thing that makes me a little different from the general ENT is I just do the T.
Well, thank you for that explanation. So I was, when I was going through my journey, right after the surgery, and I couldn't speak for, I think it was, maybe a couple of months. And then I had a really soft voice, like so soft, no one can hear me. So like if you left the room, I couldn't get anyone unless I knocked on a door, a wall, or something. So when I got back out into the workforce and out into society, my voice was so soft that oftentimes people did not hear me, which was very frustrating. And it made me socially mute. Just because it was just so difficult. No one understood me. I couldn't go through a drive-through. And so it's just so difficult to be in society and feel like you're being heard. You know, and it's like, and it made me think like, wow, you know, because I took sign language for many years, but the people I was communicating with didn't know sign language. So definitely frustrating. And then I thought, you know, well, wow, what if, you know, I couldn't actually hear or speak? How frustrating, you know, how frustrated would I feel if I were in that situation, even more so than I did. Um, I want to bring in Samara Bay, who is a dialect coach, and she has written a book that's not out yet, but it will be next year, called Permission to Speak.
You were just talking about with Dr. Johns really is relevant because each of us has a sense, although often not a lot of language for it and not a lot of sense that everyone else is having this feeling too. But see if this rings true for anybody listening. We each sort of have a sense that how we talk, how we show up in a space affects how people treat us.
Yes.
So, you know, there's obvious examples of a sort of quote unquote interview voice.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also examples from your own life probably of speaking differently to, say, a grandmother than you do to a kid, than you do to a lawyer who calls and says that he's suing you. You know, there are different voices that live inside of us, and they come out in different scenarios. And sometimes we get mistreated because how we naturally sound isn't what that listener has decided respectable sound should be. So, you know, I'm very quickly getting into sort of political territory here of what it feels like to walk through the world as a woman, as a person of color, as an immigrant with an English as a second language, you know, sound.
Right.
But it ties in with what you are doing, Dr. Johns, from what I can understand, because, of course, when people come to you, there's a problem. And it is, of course, medical, but it also is affecting their life. Not just, I can't be heard without knocking, but as you say, I can't enter a public sphere and be taken seriously with a voice that isn't 100%.
Right. And there was like no tonality. It was just like, I just talked like this.
Totally. I had a similar related experience in my 20s.
Okay.
I was in an acting program, a master's in acting. So, you know, all day, every day, conservatory acting experience with lots of talking, lots of singing. And I lost my voice repeatedly. It'd be lightly back in the mornings, gone by the evenings. I imagine the otolaryngologist in our midst could already diagnose what was going on there. But I learned through going to an ear, nose, and throat doctor that I had vocal nodules, which is like blisters on your vocal cords from talking at not quite, in my case, not quite my optimum pitch. So it turns out we all have an optimum pitch, a pitch that our vocal cords want to talk at. And if we go a little high or a little low habitually for social reasons that we have picked up, we can probably get by until we start talking a lot.
Right.
Teachers have this problem a lot. Coaches in a athletic context, cheerleaders, I've been told. Basically, people who talk a lot loudly. If you have any habitual, slightly off things going on in terms of your anatomy, it starts to pile on, and you end up with this situation where you lose your voice, and you don't know why. And as you said, you feel alone, and you feel like you messed up somewhere, like you can't hack it.
Right.
Well, this is such a rich discussion about voice and how our voice speaks so much about ourselves, and also how impairing it is when you lose your voice.
Right.
And this is, you know, voice is something that you don't see. You know, we hear, and voice problems are relatively uncommon. We all lose our voice from time to time. But we don't realize how much we rely on our voices to communicate and convey the message we need to convey to the world. Even in this digital space, we're spending so much time on our iPhones and whatnot. Until you've lost your voice, you don't really understand the importance of it. And I think it's critical to hallmark that just right now because it matters.
Yeah.
Voice matters.
I totally, thank you. Agreed. Guys,
yes.
Glad we're having this conversation because it's true. And I'll add to what you said because, yes, when we have an acute situation, which is what happened for both Zandra and me, right? And then all of the patients that you see, of course, we are confronted with, the massive value that voice has in our life. But we don't actually have to have something acute happen to start to think about how are the ways that I talk affecting how I get treated in the world. And sometimes if we're in, I'll just throw out there sort of a corporate work environment, we receive feedback from maybe even a kind boss or mentor who says something like, there's a billion examples, but one that comes to mind obviously is
Don't speak Ebonics.
don't speak Ebonics. They won't say that out loud, but they'll say something like, we would just like you to seem a little bit more professional.
Right.
Which is obviously code. What I was going to say is if you keep saying like so much, no one's going to take you seriously. Or if you keep doing upspeak or vocal fry, which are terms from linguistics for these sort of quote unquote feminine markers, which is to say women aren't the only ones who do it, but they are the only ones who get sort of maligned for it. Upspeak is when your sentences sound like questions, and vocal fry is when you kind of go into your throat, and so you have a lot less pitch variation, and it sounds a little bit like bacon frying.
Okay.
Which happens habitually for a lot of people, especially millennial and younger, at the ends of sentences. So you might not start that way, but then by the end of the sentence, you're like, or whatever. By the way, nothing is wrong with any of these. Linguists will tell you we all pick up habits for a reason. I love that because it means that any of these things that this boss or mentor might be telling you, what they're saying is it's not translating in this space.
Right.
And then you get to decide, well, do I want to go through the work of translating into this space or not? And that is an interesting place to be in, but not one that anyone talks about and has language for, which is part of why.
Well, in the African American culture, I do have to say we do.
Yeah.
Because often we code switch.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. But what I mean, and agreed, very much so. And when I talk about women and people of color and immigrants, what I'm really saying is that actually those groups of people do, on some very deep level, understand that something is going on with the relationship between our voice and how we get treated. But what we don't always have is the language around how fair or unfair that is, how widespread that is, how systemic that is, and how there may be a path forward in actually thinking about, and this is for anybody listening, what does power sound like to you? When you hear someone speak, what makes you think, oh, they're an authority figure? And what makes you think, oh, they're definitely not, I should dismiss them? Yes, part of the reason I ask this is I think it's useful for any of us, for all of us, to think about, as I'm making quick judgments about whether or not somebody is in a position of power or should be in a position of power, am I actually relying on some biases? Because among the biases that a lot of us are, deeply aware of at this point in 2022 America, voice bias is not on the list. But we're actually all, question mark, if you're not wonderful, judging people, including
It's something
ourselves.
like we do implicitly, right?
Implicitly judging people, including ourselves,
Right.
and saying, I don't sound like.
But what's so strange, Samara, is that I've gotten some of the best work in my life when I couldn't talk. Like I got like all of these speaking engagements. I did most of my public speaking, and it was really difficult. And I felt a lot of pressure. Basically, long story short, I did most of my speaking engagements with the least amount of confidence and I would say a disabled voice.
So what was that? Why did those speaking engagements find you at that time? Do you think you were compensating in another way, that it was helping you
I would
figure out
say,
what
okay,
mattered?
I would say my physical presence, the way I stand, the way I enter a room, right? Things like that. People are interested in knowing who I am. So, and then it was like, well, damn, now I have to speak. And that was an issue. Well, yeah, that was an issue for me. Because also, I would tell people later on and they would say, oh, I just thought you talked like that. Or, oh, I didn't notice. Or, oh, I thought your voice was so sexy. I was like, oh, okay, well, let me work the sexy a little bit. Yeah, so.
Well, as Dr. Johns might agree, but please tell me if this is true, a lot of us are walking around with slightly damaged voices from late nights out, smoking, whatever, sort of micro traumas
Right.
we're, throwing onto our vocal cords. And having 20/20 vision is something we all take seriously in our culture. Having 20/20 voice clarity isn't.
Right. This one guy told me, he said, oh, well, I hadn't talked to him in a long time. And he says, oh, I just figured you got older. Now, wait a minute. I didn't like that one. Didn't like that one.
Oh, there's been so many good things that have popped up here. One is that we can change our voice. We can change our voice with training. We can change our voice with our mechanics, and whether it's style or whether it's efficiency, and that not only plays into voice habilitation to work on having your voice represent you the way you want it to be, but also in voice rehabilitation as well, and the power of strengthening in voice therapy. Another item that was touched on is sort of the accumulation of little aches and pains that happen, over the years. We don't feel it. One thing about voice and voice disorders, they don't come with pain.
Yeah.
Like, if I had, I don't have great posture. If I had listened to my mother, which I should have, I would have better posture. And I probably would have less of these aches and pains and things that you can get along with. And now these things can reach a tipping point where you need to address them. So, common recommendation we have is if you have unexplained voice change that lasts longer than 2 weeks, that needs to be evaluated. You probably should have the instrument looked at, if you will. And it's actually pretty easy to have that done. That's what ear, nose, and the throat specialists in particular do. But really, what an amazing interface of voice and voice change and how voice empowers us. Love this.
If you go to my website, itswhereiam.com, I may or may not, I'm not promising, but I may or may not post the video of my larynx. Is it my larynx, Dr. Johns? So he
Correct. The
takes
larynx
this.
is the voice box, and the same thing. It's right here. We think of it as voice, but it provides an airway.
Okay.
It protects our airway, and it provides voice as well. Voice box, larynx.
Well, he put a camera down my nose into my throat. And when I looked at it on the video, I swear to God, Dr. Johns, the larynx looks like a vagina.
It is commonly reported that the laryngeal images look like a variety of things. That would be one.
Yeah.
Another is alien or monster or whatnot. I think it's beautiful. It's an amazing, elegant, complex valve that controls so much of what makes us human.
And so is the vagina.
By the way, there's a reason that cervix is both neck and down below.
Hey,
Right,
hey.
there we are. Mm-hmm.
We're purely speaking anatomy here.
Right. So go to itswhereiam.com, and there may be a little short clip of the larynx there for you to see. And don't mistake it for the vagina, because it is not that. It is my larynx.
It's still quite intimate, though, to share.
It is.
I remember seeing similarly getting scoped is what it's called, right? When you have this tiny little camera that goes up your nose and down the back of your throat. And the photos from that it's shocking. You don't often see the inside of your body.
Correct. And a lot of times, and I don't mean to keep going on and on about vaginas, I swear, but a lot of women don't know, they don't look down there either. So, I'm just had to say that. Let's get off of vaginas and get back to this larynx.
Wait, I have a question for Dr. Johns.
Okay, sure.
So, Dr. Johns, would you help us? And this is somewhat selfish, but I think it's useful for everybody. I don't know. Will you help us with understanding the relationship between breath and larynx? One of the things that Zandra said earlier was that when she lost the ability to have, her heretofore regular voice come out, that you were helping her with breathing and the connection there. I'd love to hear more about how you think about that.
So voice is really complex. We think about the voice box, okay, this is what generates sound, but really not. It's complex coordination of our breathing and our lungs, which is the power for our voice. That's the airstream that really delivers the sound. It's like a bellows in a fireplace. And then the larynx, it really serves as kind of like the reed on an instrument, on a saxophone. And the vocal cords, we have two of them, or folds, as they're more accurately called, live inside the voice box. And they come together when we speak and when we swallow, and they come apart when we breathe. So they have to come, they actively open. The valve opens, and we can take a deep breath in, and then they come together. And as they come together lightly, and that power from our lungs, the airstream pushes through them, they vibrate, just like your lips might vibrate given a raspberry. And that generates a buzzing quality. And then all of the structures in our throat above the vocal cords, they act like a horn, kind of like on a trumpet or any other instrument. The horn, it shapes and filters the sound into, what we know as human voice. And it's incredibly delicate and resilient at the same time, and beautiful and dynamic.
And what happens if we're habitually under breathing? Then does it put more pressure on the muscles in our throat/larynx?
Yeah, we call that laryngeal focus, and vocal fry or pulse mode phonation is like the penultimate manifestation of that, with no flow, all laryngeal focus.
Okay.
And we're relying on little muscles to do a lot of work versus the big muscles of our chest wall to drive our voice. And so voice can be very easy. We can have vocal endurance, but when we get into that laryngeal focus with no airflow, then it's very fatiguing and exhausting.
And I would think that's why, because you went to school for, what did you go for exactly? Was it for linguistics?
No, it was a master's in acting.
Oh, okay.
My undergrad was in English, but yes.
Okay, but with both, for acting or theater and for linguistics or speech pathology, right? You have to take classes to learn how to use your diaphragm with voice, right? So, did you take courses? Like, you did take theater courses?
I did.
You did?
Well,
Okay.
here, I'll give an answer in case you want to.
Because you're kind of looking at me like, I didn't do that.
No. Well, I didn't know where you were going.
Oh, okay.
Because linguistics is much more academic. It's not. They're not in a class learning how to breathe. Anyway, this is off air. Okay.
No. I went to school for speech pathology, and we had to take at least one semester of a course that helped us to use our diaphragm and use our speaking voice, right? Because all of that is connected. I just thought about that from how eloquently Dr. Johns was explaining the whole anatomy of, the voice box.
Totally. My understanding is that there's the medical side, which speech pathology is inside of, and obviously the laryngology that we're hearing about here. And then there's the sort of performative side,
right,
which is where the dialect coaching and the acting and the voice work. For anyone who's ever taken a class on voice, you're learning a lot of the same stuff, although obviously for the sake of art instead of for the sake of fixing a problem.
Correct.
And then obviously in the speech pathology land, there is a realm of linguistics where it becomes much more theoretical, and you're thinking about why and how people use language more than you're actually taking a class that has you doing the bellows,
right,
as you say. Yeah, but they're all such lovely ways to figure out what this thing is that we all were born with. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but my understanding is that when we're babies, we do it right. And then when life happens,
right,
we start to hold. And sometimes, maybe frequently, we habitually pick up patterns like not taking the deepest possible breath that we can and then using these other muscles to compensate. And that becomes what feels like us. It feels like our sound.
Right.
But really, of course, it's the result of a lot of life.
Because oftentimes I'll say, because I notice I say so a lot. So when I look back on video, I'll say so, or because. And when I use those two words, it's usually my way of taking a sneak breath. So that's my managing technique.
Yeah, smart.
Yeah.
I mean, as is, by the way, silence, which is very scary when you're on air, and also scary when you are in the spotlight, right? So if we're pitching an idea and we want to actually collect our thoughts in the middle of our idea to decide which direction we're going to go in, it does feel better to go, right? Because
Yes,
it
it
means I still
does.
have the floor. I know I'm collecting my thoughts. I know
Right.
you know I'm collecting, rather than one might argue, a power move of actually keeping the energy alive, but being silent for a moment.
Right. It always seems a lot longer in your brain, right? It does. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, this actually makes me think about one of the other aspects of what we're all talking about, which is like there's some connection between psychology and body, right? We know this. It's obvious. But especially when it comes to breath. Like, why are we not taking as good a breath as we could? I mean, I don't have the
I don't
answer,
know.
but it usually, I mean, in
Is
my
it called
experience,
stress?
Right. It's stress, or it's not wanting to feel your emotions, right? We've figured out ways to kind of cut ourselves off from the parts of our body where stuff feels less contained and manageable. There's also, certainly for women, a long history of what I call suck-in culture, right? Where if we suck in our middles, we'll look smaller. And then we habitually
Oh,
do that.
yeah. I'm
And we
doing that
forget
right
to-
now.
And then we forget to, right? And then I read an amazing study about how prevalent this woman referenced a term she made up, email apnea. So not
Okay.
sleep apnea where you forget to breathe, but email apnea where you get an email, you take in a breath in anticipation and forget to release it.
Oh, okay.
But what if we're all doing that? And the stakes aren't even high.
Over an email.
Over an email. So if we're doing it over an email, we're maybe also doing it over a difficult conversation.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
And then we go, oh, right, there's all that stuff. There's all that, what did you call it, Dr. Johns? That's the fuel for real speech.
Yes, right. Our power.
Our
It's
power.
so easy to forget with voice. Something that comes automatically. We don't think about it. It just sort of comes out, right?
Right.
We forget that it's actually a physical task, just like walking or running or any other athletics. And the higher performance in voice you go, the more athletic it becomes. And it's all a physical task. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean that that's not what it is. But it's also so wonderful because it conveys so many things about us and our emotions and our feelings and our soul that comes along with it.
A lot of times people deal with anxiety, and we know that breathing techniques are extremely helpful. So, Dr. Johns?
One strategy that we apply commonly for people who are feeling either short of breath or need a moment to recharge and refresh their voice, or have chronic throat clearing, throat irritation, or chronic cough, a simple breathing strategy is this. And this is really just more for throat relaxation and comfort.
Okay.
So we commonly advise just take a sip of a healthy beverage.
Okay. Such
Breathe
as
in
water,
through your nose
juice.
deeply.
Okay.
And breathe out on a like you're shushing a baby, not like you're shushing a teenager. Like a it puts positive pressure back on your throat.
Okay.
Positive air pressure. It also makes the vocal cords separate a bit and stabilize. And so it's relaxing. It changes the feeling that your throat is having, that your brain's telling you to clear your throat or cough or it's irritated. And it's a very relaxed posture, very similar to a lot of yogic breathing and other sort of breathing techniques. So that's my little nugget there.
I would add, I love that. And here's my add to yours. Okay. So I love the psychological hack aspect of this. How do we clear out some mind gunk that's perhaps built up around how we present in public or around our own sense of power? So doing exactly what you just described. And I love that, by the way, for those of you who aren't watching this but listening, Dr. Johns closed his eyes when he did it. And then I think both of us closed our eyes when we did it too. There's something very meditative, as you say, about this slow, warm shush out. And then I would also add, if your eyes are closed, try this. Think about, and especially if this is in the moments before you're about to do something scary, because as you say, this is when anxiety tends to hit us. As you're taking that slow breath out, think about the people in your life who, maybe one person even, who really gets you, who really sees you, who really admires you. Maybe a moment even in time when someone you admire admired you back. Some moment when you really felt glowing with pride and felt really understood. And when you close your eyes, think about them looking at you with that warmth.
Wow.
And breathe that back in after you've done the breathing out. There's a lot of studies that say that when we prime ourselves for this sort of power, it affects the next moment and the next, as does obviously the opposite, right? If those moments of anxiety, if we are the meanest to ourselves as we possibly can be, if the voice in our head says to us, get it together, what's wrong with you? Why can't you do this? Like that person over there who doesn't seem to be having any problems at all. Well, you can imagine what that primes you for. And if it's a binary and we're talking about priming you for power or for a feeling of powerlessness, of course it's more complex than that, but that's a pretty easy way to think about it. How loving of yourself to prime yourself for power. And power does not have to mean some, sort of perverted version of power where it's power over somebody or some sort of historically masculine coded, violent power or grabbing of resources.
Correct. Thanks for that clarification.
Power can, let's make sure when we're talking about power that we're also thinking about power in other words that are related, like leadership and strength. We should think about those concepts, really, really honoring that. When we think about, for example, power, it helps to think, what is my own archetype for power? Who do I love in the larger world or in my own life who has power? What's a version of power that I actually want, that I want to step into? Because that's what we're talking about here when we're, quote unquote, priming ourselves for power.
So with that being said, I'd like for you, Samara, to tell us more about some of the different types of works that you do. You are a dialect coach. You have the book. We talked about the book. And you also work in the industry. You work in the Hollywood industry, and you also work in politics.
That's right. I got involved in the 2018 midterms. MoveOn.org was looking for people to work pro bono, to coach basically first time, exclusively in my case, female candidates for office. So this is, when you think about it, not lifelong public servants, but people who just recently, in this political cycle or in that political cycle, decided, no one's standing up for my community. I guess I have to.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a long history of what is it to scale yourself up? What is it to show up in public like the most relaxed, most powerful, most kind version of yourself? Rather, what most of us tend to do when we don't have a lot of experience speaking in public is hide.
Right.
So we show up, but we don't show up. And by that, I mean, technically speaking, we will hide in our throat. We'll stop breathing. We'll end up sounding a bit monotone. So like if you sound like this and you're saying, welcome everybody, I'm so glad that you're here. It's really hard to also show I care, because those ways of hiding are ways of saying, don't worry, I'm cool, I'm good, I'm not going to bother anyone with caring too much. I'm gonna, whatever. There's a bunch of different versions of this.
You won't get the vote.
But you won't get the vote because you won't be trustworthy, because we actually need to see you. We need vulnerability. This is what I've been thinking about lately, because I do come from the theater and from Hollywood, and now I'm working not just in politics, but with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of CEOs, a lot of C-suite level people who really are eyeing power in a new way and frustrated with their habits.
Okay.
And what I'm realizing is there's a really direct connection between the Hollywood stuff and these, real people, which is when we watch something. I just finally watched the second season of Bridgerton. When we watch something and we really fall in love with a character, what they're doing is really showing up when they show up. It's a character, right? It's an actor doing this. But those moments when they are revealing themselves as this character, when they are being vulnerable, and we fall in love with them, that is the exact same thing that happens in amazing moments, viral moments of pop culture speech giving. And we can think of moments like AOC when she was on the floor of Congress a few years back, talking about a sexist comment from a fellow congressman, but actually talking about how much a lot of people around the country have to deal with those microaggressions. Or Oprah at the, 2018 Golden Globes, where she gave an impassioned speech and the next day everybody said that she should run for president. It's not unconnected. It's people who show up and say something true in a voice that sounds like their own and are willing to be vulnerable, just like those actors in Bridgerton. And that is not how public speaking is taught. And it is not how this sort of, sometimes it's called executive presence in more of a corporate context, is taught. We're often taught in those contexts to keep our voice low, especially if we're a woman, to keep it pitch-wise low, because low codes for power. We're told to not have a huge amount of variation up and down, because then we'll sound, girly.
Right.
We're certainly told to have a predominant culture white voice. We're certainly told, a number of things about pace, a measured pace. This results in the most boring, generic version of you rather than somebody we're going to fall in love with. And obviously, in a work context, we don't have to talk about love, but we can talk about how we get somebody to care about what you care about, which is really what it is when we're pitching an idea or when we're pitching ourselves for office. Care about this stuff with me. Let's care together.
If you are looking to master your voice, shall I say, you are able to, again, go to my website and you will find Samara Bay's bio there and information on how to contact her. But for those who are listening now, can you please let our listeners know?
Sure. If you are interested in sort of diving into this and thinking about your own relationship to your own voice, which I sometimes call something we need to detox, because there is some toxicity in our culture that has a little residue in our voice and in our relationship to our voice. I have a newsletter that I've been putting out once a week that I call a love letter to your voice.
Okay.
This week's is actually about the relationship between body language and voice. It's just a lovely little spot to start to think about this stuff seriously. I think sometimes we don't quite appreciate that our own private fears, I don't like my voice, I don't like this thing that my voice does, is actually the result of a history of tiny little comments we've gotten, tiny little messages we've received. And to know that it's collective, to know that this is actually systemic, that we can talk about this stuff in solidarity with each other rather than like, I personally have a personal failing, clearly I can't hack it. As you know, it makes all the difference.
Yes. Wow. Okay. And so thank you so much for sharing this information with us, Samara, and coming all the way down from Los Angeles, California.
I couldn't not be in a room with you.
I appreciate you being in studio. It's nice to have you in studio. And Dr. Johns, I'll be seeing you really soon. And then so be prepared, audience, when I come back. There might be a little change in my voice. Let's see what it sounds like. I got referred to you from Las Vegas because there was not a specialist for me, at least not one of your caliber here in Las Vegas. So, I've met quite a few people, like I mentioned before, that have issues due to allergies is one big, huge reason, accidents. But I have to travel all the way to Los Angeles just to see Dr. Johns, and he's phenomenal.
And people should know they need to listen to their voice. It might be telling them something. If it's changed, something's not right, get it checked. It's easy to get a scope, make sure nothing bad's happening. There's treatment out there. Take good care of your voice.
So his information is on the website as well. itswhereiam.com. And I want to thank you both for being here. Alrighty. Well, 91.5 Jazz and more. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next month, second Saturday of the month at 8:30 a.m. It's Where I Am. Bye.